Canyon has gone all out to make this new Canyon Lux World Cup 2027 an absolute top seller. Why? Well, because they've changed the geometry, greatly improved the kinematics, and the bike's weight is incredible. There are a few surprises that I'm going to tell you about next, and above all, the price across the whole range is ultra competitive. Let's dive into the review, but first, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Canyon aims to streamline its entire cross-country range. In recent years, we've had two models, the World Cup, which was for strict Olympic cross-country, and the Lux Trail, which was more aimed at that new category that emerged called downcountry. Now it's all built around a single platform, and what we have is 120 millimeters of travel in the front, 110 in the rear, a much more progressive geometry with a 66-degree head angle and a 75.5-degree seat tube angle. And we have a suspension system that is exactly the same as before. In the previous model, we had a horizontally positioned shock, single pivot, flexing the seat stays, a single linkage, and a shock extender. At first glance, things may look the same, but I can assure you they have. Why? Because this bike's kinematics have been completely reworked. And even though it's something we can't see with the naked eye as soon as we get on it and push it, the change is quickly noticeable to the point that it feels like a completely new model. Let's head on to one of my favorite technical trails. Well, gentlemen, the first thing you notice is that the bike handles really well. I think that's mainly due beyond the geometry to how light it is, especially considering the price of this particular model. The way it performs, it's amazing. Then, on the other hand, something that's noticeable is the improvement in the predictability of the rear triangle. The previous model had a very good initial part of the travel for reading the terrain, let's say, like the Titan Desert. But when you took it into more technical areas, it was like the bike split in two and the rear triangle wasn't entirely predictable. Here, however, with the change in kinematics, the engineers have managed to make this bike much more like a scalpel, and you can put it exactly where you want, not just the front wheel, but the rear follows along, and this is something that's really appreciated. I don't think this was achieved by improving the lateral rigidity, because honestly, the feeling of lateral rigidity is very similar to the previous model. The previous model had acceptable stiffness, not good or bad. For this type of model with, let's say, medium bearings, this rigidity is fine. But I think that above all, this improvement in the predictability of the rear triangle has been achieved through the kinematics. Let's say that the second part of the shock absorber's travel is much firmer. If there's one thing that has characterized Canyon regarding weight, it's always been their honesty, because they've always published the weights of all their models from the top of the line to the entry-level ones. That's not something we can say is standard in our industry. The German engineers have been obsessed with shaving off every possible gram from this new World Cup frame. They've managed to create one of the lightest frames in the World Cup, leaving the weight at just 1,480 grams for the frame with all the hardware, but without the shock. Canyon's honesty. With this particular model, Canyon goes a step further. They send us a document where you can see a breakdown of every single part that makes up the frame and the weight of each one. This leaves the total weight of the models at 9.82 kilos for the top of the line version and just 11.5 kilos for the entry level version. This bike has been designed directly with feedback and demands from the professional World Cup team, and one of the points they were very clear about that needed improvement was precisely the kinematics, so they focused on an overall evolution of the kinematics, but above all, a specific improvement of the anti-squat. To give us an example, in the second part of the suspension travel on the previous model, for me, and now it has been improved a lot by increasing the firmness, and the first part of the travel, which in the previous model was already very good, has also evolved in this new model. The anti-squat has also improved a lot compared to the previous model, which means less pedal bob, both on flat sections and especially when climbing. The bike has even better firmness because the previous model was already very good in this aspect. Let's say that in some way it reminds me, even though it's a 120 up front and a 110 out back, it really reminds me of the behavior of a super caliber in that first part of the suspension, with the super caliber having more travel. So that's a very positive point in this regard. Once again, this improvement is very noticeable thanks to the changes in the kinematics made by the engineers compared to the previous model. But I also want to tell you here that to achieve excellence in this behavior, it requires an extra effort on our part by increasing the rear shock pressure above what the manufacturer recommends. To achieve, at least with this model that I'm testing, an excellent performance, I'm telling you, I've been testing this bike for 2.5 hours. Today we are riding, and I still haven't locked it unless a very specific situation comes up. On asphalt, sprinting around here on these kinds of trails, going up, going down, I'm fully open. And that's very good news for a single pivot bike on a mid-range bike like this. Precisely, the anti-squat changes a lot depending on the size of the chainring we're using. Imagine in a cross-country race with really steep climbs, we might be using a 32-tooth chainring, and in a Cape Epic, which is much more rolling, we could even use a 38-tooth chainring. Well, the solution that Canyon has found to always keep the anti-squat at the most optimal level possible, regardless of the chainring size we're using, is this flip chip, which has 2 positions. With this flip chip, we're not going to change the geometry of the bike or the travel. It's simply going to do what I mentioned before. Keep the anti-squat at the most optimal level possible, and it also gives advanced higher level bikers the option to play with different flip chip positions and different chainring sizes, allowing them to achieve the best pedaling feel for themselves. That's something you'll hardly be able to manage on other bikes competing with the Canyon Lux. The World Cup mechanics also had their demands and asked the Canyon engineers to please make the bike much easier to assemble and disassemble. So what we see here is much more visible bolts, completely moving away from that new trend where almost all bikes have the bolts and bearings on the right side completely hidden. Here everything is visible and much more accessible. On the other hand, Canyon tells us that they have also improved the durability of the bearings and the stiffness, both of the linkage and the shock extender. You know, I test a lot of high-end bikes, 10,000, 12,000, 15,000 euros. I think I can safely say that this is the best bike, the best 15,000 euro mountain bike I've ever tested. Or in other words, the 5,000 euro bike that most closely matches a top-of-the-line bike in terms of overall performance. We're talking about weight, we're talking about geometry, and more generally about its overall handling. And all of that without forgetting that it has a CFR frame, which means it's the highest end frame from Canyon, exactly the same one used in World Cup competitions. And if you get any of the models in the range, this one or even the Kexa, which is under 4,000 euros, you'll be able to upgrade it little by little and end up with an absolute beast. Anyway, this bike is amazing. It's making me fall in love with mountain biking all over again. After so much time riding gravel, it's like, wow, this feels great. Enjoying big tires again. Let's get into the details. I'll warn you, this bike is packed with features. To start, there's a lockout on the handlebar to prevent damage in the carbon on the top tube. Then we also have the cables entering through the inside of the head tube, the front part. A very smart solution for carrying spare parts and tools, with a double bolt mount on the front part. Here I carry a multi-tool, but there's also the option to mount a specific bag that takes up this whole front triangle here. Something where I think the engineers really nailed it is the rear mount of the rear disc post mount, okay? Because it doesn't anchor on the seat stay, but instead anchors directly on the rear axle, completely freeing the seat stay from the obligation to be rigid in this part, and therefore giving it the absorption that the engineers wanted. The post mount is set up for a 160mm disc diameter, but there's also a 180 option, and of course a hidden lever so we can remove the rear axle. The bottom bracket is a press fit, and something that's really important is the ability to carry two large 750ml bottles, both in the front and the back, and in all sizes. Everything I've explained to you so far is important, but pay attention to the range and prices because you're going to be amazed. For the first time, Canyon wanted its highest end frame, the most advanced, the lightest, the one used in the World Cup, the CFR, to be present throughout the entire range, starting from the bottom with the CF model, which starts at €4,000. Don't be fooled by the CF name because it still has the CFR frame. The only difference is that this bike comes with aluminum wheels and a separate bar and stem setup. But as you can see, €4,000, 11.5 kilos, and the top of the line frame. If we go up a level, you'll find this CFR X TDI2, which I think is going to become a top seller. Why? Because it's just under €5,000 retail price and weighs just about 11 kilos with 30mm wide internal carbon, rims a carbon cockpit, and a dropper post. Well, I think it's a very, very hard bike to beat. From there, everything goes up, obviously, all the way to the highest range, where we find the CFR X RDI2 with a weight of 9.82 kilos and a price of €8,000. As you can see, the competitiveness, both in price and weight, across the whole range is incredible. These bikes are going to be very hard to beat nowadays, given the current market. What do you guys think? By the way, you haven't seen any model yet with Flight Attendant. I spoke with the brand and they said a limited edition with this technology will come later, but for now we don't have Flight Attendant. The most important thing for me out of this whole range is that since it has the best possible frame, even at the entry level price, you can buy the bike that you can actually afford. Gradually, you can keep improving it, always knowing you have the best frame. Piece by piece, you might eventually have a top of the line bike. Pros and cons, your favorite part. First, here's what I liked. I have the list ready. To start with, the handling. I think the handling of this bike is incredible. It's really well thought out. The geometry, the suspension travel, it's balanced. And especially with this one at €5,000, I think it's amazing how well this bike rides. Then the weight, it's competitive. I think throughout the whole range, the same thing happens with the price. The simplicity is also a positive thing, in the sense that it has a shock setup that's easy to maintain. It's not going to cause any problems. There's no over-engineering anywhere on the frame. It doesn't have any hidden shock, nothing like that. It's just simple, it works, it's practical, effective, go for it. And let me point out something very small, but something I really liked, which are the grips that come standard. These Ergon grips are a bit wider in this part, near the palm of your hand, and a little narrower in the finger area. And honestly, they provide a great grip and feel. I love them. I rarely mention these small things, but I think they contribute to the overall experience. Things I didn't like so much, well, maybe this is a bit personal, call me old school if you want. But in 2026, I still prefer bikes where the cables go in through the side of the head tube. The aesthetic part of having cables in the front is nice, but I prefer cables on the side, which adds to the overall simplicity of the bike. I think it would have been a great idea to be able to route those cables through the side of the head tube. And finally, something that has to do with a consumable, which is the tires. The Upgradability tires, a German brand, are very well designed for riding in Central European forests in autumn with lots of leaves on the ground. But when you take them into Mediterranean forests with very dry soil and loose dirt, they don't quite perform, at least to my taste, as much as you might expect from them. But oh well. It's a tire, it wears out and you can use whichever you prefer. I'm gonna say it loud and clear, This is the best €5,000 full suspension mountain bike I've ever tested, the one with the least difference compared to a top of the line model in terms of handling. It's a bike that I think I could recommend both to someone looking for professional performance, whether it's in Olympic cross country or marathon stage races, as well as to someone who wants to make the jump for the first time from a hardtail to a full suspension bike and who can spend around 4,000 or 5,000 euros. And then really over time, you can keep improving it because the components can get better. But above all, you already have the frame, the CFR, the top tier frame right from the entry level model. Share your thoughts in the comments, rate from 1 to 10, share with your biker friends, and see you next time. Be happy. Bye.